In July of this year, the Portuguese parliament passed a law telling people what they are not allowed to wear on their own faces in public. Fines running into the thousands of euros, prison time for anyone who forces a woman to cover. And all of this in a country where you could walk through Lisbon for a week and not see a single niqab. Portugal was one of the last holdouts in Western Europe. Now it is on the list. But Portugal is not the story. Portugal is the seventh domino. Over the past 3 years, 7 countries have passed or advanced laws restricting how Muslims dress, how their mosques are funded, and how their children are raised. Some of them are the countries you would expect. 3 of them are not. 3 of them are Muslim-majority nations, where the government banning the veil answers to a population that is overwhelmingly Muslim itself. They never signed a treaty. There was no summit, no shared committee, no coordinated announcement, and yet the laws keep arriving in the same order, built on the same arguments, pointing back to the same court ruling. Something is connecting them. And it is stranger than the version you have probably been told. If you want the full picture on stories like this, the ones that get flattened into a headline and a hashtag before anyone reads the actual legislation, subscribe. This channel goes through the documents so you do not have to. Now let us start with what Portugal actually did, because almost every report about it got at least one thing wrong. The bill began with Chega, the hard-right party led by André Ventura. And when it was first introduced in October of 2025, it was written plainly. It named the burqa. It named the niqab. It described face coverings worn for reasons of gender or religion. There was no ambiguity about who the law was for. Then, it stalled. For roughly 8 months, the bill sat in the Constitutional Affairs Committee while lawyers picked at it, because Portugal has a constitution with an explicit protection for freedom of religion. And everyone involved understood that a law naming a faith was a law that could be struck down. So in June, the governing Social Democrats rewrote it. The new version says almost nothing about religion. It talks about public security. It talks about the concealment of the face in public spaces. It applies to everyone, in theory, and it carves out exceptions for medical reasons, for weather, for professional and artistic work, for airplanes, for diplomatic buildings, and for religious ceremonies inside places of worship. That last exception is the tell. You can cover your face inside a mosque during a ceremony. You cannot cover it walking to the mosque. The rewritten bill passed committee on the 9th of July and cleared Parliament shortly after, with the center-right coalition, Chega, the Liberal Initiative, and the CDS voting in favor, and every party of the left voting against. Fines run from 200 euros for negligence up to 4,000 for deliberate violation. Forcing another person to cover their face carries a prison term of up to 3 years. It still has to survive the president, who can sign it, veto it, or send it to the Constitutional Court. If it takes effect on schedule, the ban becomes enforceable at the start of 2027, after a transition period in which authorities are supposed to inform the affected communities. André Ventura himself framed the vote as a historic day for Portuguese democracy and for the safeguarding of national values. On the floor, confronted by women lawmakers from the left, he said the bill had to exist to protect their own daughters from one day having to wear a burqa in Portugal. A lawmaker from the governing Social Democrats put it differently, arguing the debate was about equality between men and women, and that no woman should be forced to veil her face. 2 of the 10 parties in the chamber abstained rather than vote either way, on the grounds that the proposal itself was an incitement to discrimination. Amnesty International called it a blanket ban incompatible with Portugal's obligations under international human rights law and asked the president to send it for constitutional review. And here is the part that keeps coming up in Portuguese coverage. Almost nobody in Portugal wears a niqab. A Muslim community representative in Lisbon told one outlet she could count the niqab wearers she knew on her fingers and that she had never seen a burqa in the country at all. Portugal's Muslim population is small, largely arrived from Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau after 1974, and by most accounts unusually well integrated. So a parliament spent 9 months writing a law about a garment that is, functionally, not there. Which raises the obvious question: if the problem does not exist, what is the law actually for? To answer that, you have to go back to the country that wrote the original. France did not invent restrictions on religious dress. France industrialized them. The foundation is laïcité, a principle that turns 120 years old this decade, born from a 1905 law separating church and state. In its original form, it was aimed squarely at the Catholic Church, at priests in classrooms and crucifixes in town halls. It was not written with Islam in mind because in 1905 there was barely an Islamic community in France to write about. The first modern turn came in 2004 when France banned conspicuous religious symbols in state schools. On paper, it covered the kippah, the turban, and the large cross. In practice, everyone understood which garment had triggered the debate. Then, in 2010, France became the first Western country to ban face coverings anywhere in public. The law never uses the word Islam. It describes the concealment of the face. But the parliamentary debate that produced it was about the niqab, and the enforcement record makes that obvious. In the years since it took effect, the law has produced somewhere in the region of 1,600 arrests and citations. In 2021 came the law on Republican principles, widely called the separatism law, which extended state oversight into mosques, religious associations, foreign funding, and homeschooling. In 2023, a new education minister banned the abaya, a loose, full-length dress, from state schools, on the reasoning that it had become a religious signal rather than a garment. And then the pace picked up again. In 2025, the French government received a report on the Muslim Brotherhood, prepared by senior civil servants, which described the organization as a threat to national cohesion and warned that it risked undermining the fabric of society and Republican institutions. Within days, Macron's own party, Renaissance, proposed banning the hijab in public for anyone under 15, arguing that the headscarf undermines gender equality and the protection of children. The proposal came with a companion idea, a criminal offense for parents who coerce their underage daughters into covering. Separately, senators pushed a bill to ban the headscarf from domestic sports competitions, amateur and professional. The interior minister at the time called the hijab a symbol of submission. And in late 2025, right-wing senators published a report proposing 17 measures against what they termed Islamism, including a ban on headscarves for mothers chaperoning school trips and a restriction on Ramadan fasting for under 16s. Critics inside France, including secular ones, argue that this is laïcité turned inside out. A principle designed to keep the state out of religion is being used to push the state into it. A rule that once protected citizens from the church now tells citizens what to wear on the street. But France is not the reason 6 other countries followed. France provided the template. Something else provided the permission. In 2014, a French woman known in the record only as SAS took her country to the European Court of Human Rights. She was a practicing Muslim. She wore the niqab by choice, not at anyone's instruction, and not every day. She argued that France's ban violated her freedom of religion, her freedom of expression, and her right to a private life. The court's Grand Chamber ruled against her, but the reasoning matters more than the outcome because of what the judges refused to accept. They rejected the public safety argument. A blanket ban across an entire country was disproportionate to any realistic security threat. They also rejected the gender equality argument, and they rejected it firmly, pointing out that a state cannot invoke equality between the sexes in order to ban a practice that women defend as their own choice. You do not liberate a woman by fining her. Then the court found a third path. It accepted that France could ban the veil in the name of what the judgment called living together, the idea that a shared society requires open faces in public space, that the face is a minimum condition of social contact. That single concept became the legal key to the entire continent, because living together is not measurable. You cannot test it, quantify it, or falsify it. Any government, anywhere in Europe, can now assert that face coverings damage social cohesion and point to a Grand Chamber ruling that already agreed. In 2017, the same court upheld Belgium's ban on the same basis, which is exactly why Portugal's lawyers spent 8 months rewriting a bill to talk about security and public order rather than religion, and why Italy's bill is framed the same way, and why Kazakhstan's law describes clothing that interferes with facial recognition. They are not being clever. They are following a published legal recipe. There is a counterweight, and it is rarely mentioned. In 2018, the United Nations Human Rights Committee looked at the same French law and reached the opposite conclusion, finding that the ban violated the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and disproportionately harmed the women it claimed to protect. Two international bodies, same law, opposite verdicts, and no mechanism to resolve the disagreement because the UN Committee's findings are not binding and the European courts are. So governments follow the ruling that says yes. Switzerland took a different route, and it is the route that unsettles constitutional lawyers the most. Switzerland did not pass its restrictions through a parliament. It voted on them directly. In 2009, Swiss citizens were asked whether new minarets should be permitted anywhere in the country. Not mosques, minarets, the towers, the architecture. Polling suggested the measure would fail. It passed with roughly 57%, and the result stunned the Swiss political establishment, which had campaigned against it almost unanimously. At the time, there were 4 minarets in the entire country. 12 years later, in 2021, the country voted again, this time on face coverings in public. The margin was thin, a shade over 51%. The campaign poster showed a woman in black, eyes visible, and the slogan translated to something close to stop extremism. Officials estimated that the number of women in Switzerland who actually wore a full-face veil was in the dozens. The ban came into force at the start of 2025 with a fine of up to 1,000 francs. Here is what makes Switzerland uncomfortable to talk about and why it gets skipped in most coverage. There is no elite conspiracy to point at. No unelected commission, no foreign pressure, no party leader forcing it through. The Swiss government opposed the minaret ban. The Swiss people passed it anyway. That is the part neither side of this argument likes. If you believe these laws are imposed on populations, Switzerland is a problem. If you believe they simply reflect the popular will and are therefore beyond criticism, Switzerland is also a problem, because direct democracy is exactly the mechanism a constitution is supposed to constrain. Rights that survive only when a majority feels generous are not rights. They are permissions. Switzerland proved the demand was real, which is when the bigger countries started drafting. Italy's bill, introduced in October of 2025 by Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, is the one that should be getting the most attention, and it gets the least, because Italy's proposal is not really about cloth. Yes, it bans face coverings in public spaces, in shops, schools, universities, and offices, with fines from 300 to 3,000 euros. But the clothing provision is one clause in a much larger structure. The bill also proposes financial scrutiny of religious organizations that are not officially recognized by the Italian state. It proposes restrictions on foreign donations to places of worship. It requires full financial transparency from religious institutions. It creates criminal penalties for virginity testing and forced marriage, and legal measures against coercion in interfaith marriage. One of the bill's sponsors framed it this way, saying religious freedom is sacred but must be exercised openly and in compliance with the Italian constitution. The government describes the package as a response to Islamic and cultural separatism. Look at what that bundle does. It takes a set of practices that almost everyone agrees are wrong: forced marriage, virginity testing, coercion, and binds them into the same document as mosque funding rules and clothing restrictions. Oppose the funding rules, and you can be described as defending forced marriage. Support the criminal penalties, and you have swallowed the rest. This is the same widening you can trace in France, from schools in 2004 to the street in 2010, to associations and money in 2021, to sports and childhood in 2025. Each law is narrower in its text than in its consequences, and each one makes the next one easier to argue for. Italy has not passed it yet. The coalition has the votes. So that is 4. France wrote the template, the European court supplied the reasoning, Switzerland proved the votes were there, Italy widened the scope, Portugal joined last. If the story ended there, it would be a simple story. Europe versus Islam. Everyone knows how to argue about that one, except the story does not end there. And the next 3 countries break the frame completely. Uzbekistan is roughly 90% Muslim. In 2023, it banned face coverings in public and set fines of more than $250, citing security and national tradition. Tajikistan is around 96% Muslim. In June of 2024, its parliament amended the law on traditions and celebrations to prohibit clothing described as foreign to national culture. That phrasing is broader than anything in Europe because it does not stop at the face. It reaches the hijab itself. Fines run from roughly 8,000 to 54,000 simoni, a serious sum in a country with those wages, and the penalties climb higher for state officials and religious figures. This followed years of unofficial enforcement, police stopping women over headscarves and men over beards. Kyrgyzstan banned the niqab under amendments to its religious sphere law, effective the 1st of February 2025, with fines up to 20,000 som, which is more than half the average monthly wage. Police conduct street patrols to enforce it. The state-backed Muslim Spiritual Directorate publicly supported the ban, stating that the hijab is obligatory for Muslim women, but the niqab is not, and describing the full veil as alien to Kyrgyz society. And on the 30th of June 2025, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev signed a law making Kazakhstan the last country in Muslim-majority Central Asia to ban face coverings in public. The wording is careful. It prohibits clothing that interferes with facial recognition, with exemptions for medical need, weather, civil defense, official duties, sport, and cultural events. Kazakhstan is around 70% Muslim. 2 years earlier, it had already banned headscarves for students and teachers in schools, a decision that reportedly led about 150 girls to leave their studies in protest. Tokayev put the reasoning in language no European politician would ever use. Rather than wearing face-concealing black robes, he said, "It is much better to wear clothes in the national style." That sentence is the entire Central Asian argument in one line. These governments are not saying the veil is un-Christian or un-European or a security threat from outside. They are saying it is un-Kazakh, un-Tajik, un-Kyrgyz. They are drawing a line between what they consider their own inherited Islam, centuries old, woven through local dress, local shrines, local practice, and an imported Gulf-influenced Islam that arrived through satellite television, migrant labor, foreign-funded mosques, and the internet. In Central Asia, this is sometimes called Arabization. Kyrgyzstan runs state campaigns warning against it and promoting traditional Kyrgyz clothing. Officials in Kazakhstan have described black veils as non-Kazakh and as representing imported ideology. There is also a harder, less romantic layer underneath. These are post-Soviet states with authoritarian instincts and long memories of civil war and insurgency. Tajikistan fought one in the 1990s with an Islamist opposition at its center. Religious revival is not read there as personal piety. It is read as a potential political movement, and it is regulated accordingly, which is why the penalties fall hardest on officials and clerics, so the frame collapses. This is not the West against Islam. 3 of these 7 countries are Muslim majority. Their leaders are nominally Muslim, and their justifications have nothing to do with Christianity or European identity. What all 7 share is not a religion or a region. It is a theory of the state. Every one of these governments has decided that public space belongs to the nation, that visible religious difference is a claim against that space, and that the state has standing to referee what people wear on their own bodies in it. France calls it laïcité. Kazakhstan calls it national style. The mechanism is the same. Nobody coordinated this. There is no committee, no treaty, no shared secretariat, but 4 things arrived together, and they explain the timing better than any conspiracy does. The first is legal cover. Before 2014, a government banning the veil faced real risk of being overturned in Strasbourg. After the Living Together judgment, that risk mostly disappeared for face coverings, and legislatures act on risk. The second is a template you can copy. Portugal's rewrite in June, shifting from religious language to public security language, is not original thinking. It is the standard workaround, and the same architecture appears in Kazakhstan's facial recognition wording and Italy's security framing. Legislative language travels between countries the way software does. The third is electoral arithmetic. Across Europe, parties that were fringe 15 years ago now hold real leverage. Chega wrote Portugal's bill and watched a center-right government adopt it. In the Netherlands, a party built on this issue won an election. When the mainstream right sees votes leaving toward the harder right, it competes for them, and this is the cheapest possible policy to compete with. It costs no money, it requires no new agency, and it can be announced in a sentence. The fourth is that these laws are extremely easy to pass because the people they affect are almost never in the room. Portugal has close to no niqab wearers. Switzerland's estimate ran to a few dozen. Denmark's justice minister said openly before his country's 2018 ban that he did not think many women wore the burqa in Denmark, but that if they did, they should be fined. The smaller the affected group, the lower the political cost, and the more the law functions as a statement rather than a regulation. That is the honest answer to the word together. 7 governments reached similar conclusions at similar times because they were reading the same court decisions, watching the same elections, copying the same drafting, and facing the same absence of organized resistance, which is arguably more unsettling than coordination. A conspiracy has a room you can find and people you can name. This has neither. Strip away the argument for a moment and follow one woman. An RFE-RL reporter spoke to a 38-year-old housewife in the southern Kyrgyz town of Karasu after her country's ban took effect. She had 2 children. She had started wearing the niqab 6 years earlier when she married at her husband's request. He works in Russia. She said she did not know what to do or what he would say when he returned. Since reading about the ban online, she had been trying not to leave the house at all, and when she had to go out, she covered her face with a medical mask. Whatever you think of how she came to wear it, notice what the law achieved in her case. A woman whose covering may well have been imposed on her by a man is now confined to her home by the state. If the goal was liberation, that outcome is a failure on its own terms, and it is the outcome the European Court itself warned about in 2014 when it refused to accept gender equality as a valid reason for a ban. There is also the question of how any of this gets enforced. Kyrgyz police run street patrols and raids. French officers have issued citations at bus stops and outside supermarkets. In practice, enforcement means a uniformed man walking up to a woman in a public place and instructing her to uncover her face, which is a strange way for a state to demonstrate that it respects a woman's authority over her own body. There is a second effect, and it is broader. When Kazakhstan restricted headscarves in schools, reports indicated about 150 girls left education rather than remove them. Those girls did not become more secular. They became less educated and less connected to the institutions most likely to widen their options. And there is a third effect, harder to measure. Every one of these laws sends a message to a much larger group than it regulates. A face-covering ban technically affects a handful of women. It is read by millions of hijab-wearing women and by their husbands and sons and neighbors as a statement about whether they are fully part of the country they live in. Portugal's Muslim community, which has spent 50 years being held up as an integration success story, spent this year watching Parliament debate them. You do not need to agree with the niqab to notice that a law which cannot find its target still hits something. It would be dishonest to run through all of that without giving the argument for these laws its strongest form, because it is not an empty one. And plenty of people who hold it are neither bigots nor fools. It goes roughly like this. A face is not a piece of clothing. Human societies have run on facial recognition for the whole of their existence, and a public space where some people are identifiable and others are not is a genuinely different kind of space. Every democracy already regulates dress in some contexts, and nobody calls a helmet law religious persecution. Then there is coercion. Defenders of these bans argue that the choice framing collapses under scrutiny, that a garment worn at a husband's or father's or community's insistence is not a choice in any meaningful sense, and that the state's job is to protect the woman inside the family, not to respect the family's authority over her. The Karasu case can be read as evidence for that position as easily as against it. And in Central Asia, the argument has a shape Europe does not have. Those governments are not defending a Christian culture. They are defending a local Muslim culture that they believe is being displaced by a foreign-funded one, and some of the loudest support comes from their own religious authorities. When Kyrgyzstan's Muslim Spiritual Directorate says the hijab is obligatory, but the niqab is not, that is a theological claim made by Muslim clerics, not a secular one imposed on them. The counter-argument is equally clear. Rights that hold only for practices a majority finds comfortable are not rights. Bans have not been shown to reduce extremism, and the European Court itself refused the security justification. Coercion is already illegal in every one of these countries, and if the concern is coercion, then prosecute the person doing the coercing rather than fining the person being coerced. And a law drafted about a garment almost nobody wears is doing political work, not protective work. Both of those cases are being made right now in 7 parliaments, in roughly those words. Portugal's law waits on a president who can sign it, veto it, or send it to the Constitutional Court, and Amnesty has asked for exactly that referral. If the court reviews it, the ruling will matter far beyond Portugal, because it will test whether the security rewrite actually works or whether judges can see through it. Italy's bill has a coalition majority behind it and no obvious obstacle. A broader ban has been floated in Sweden. Regional restrictions already exist in parts of Spain and Italy. Luxembourg, Bulgaria, Austria, Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands are already on the list in one form or another, which means the map of Western Europe without such a law is getting genuinely small, and the direction of travel inside these laws is the thing to watch, not the laws themselves. France started with schools and is now debating the street, the sports field, the fasting habits of teenagers, and the age of 15. Tajikistan skipped the face entirely and went for the headscarf. The face-covering ban is the version that passes first because it is the version with the fewest people standing in its way. It has never once been the version that stops there. 7 countries, 3 continents worth of political traditions, republics, monarchies, a direct democracy, and several states nobody would describe as free. No treaty between them, no meeting, no shared plan. They all arrived at the same law anyway. Not one of the women these laws name had a hand in writing a single line of them. They were all answering the same question, and it is a question every country with a religious minority eventually has to answer. How much visible difference can a shared public space hold before it stops being shared? Portugal answered it in July. Whoever is next is drafting right now. If you want to understand what actually drives a story like this rather than what gets shouted about it, subscribe. The next one goes deeper on how a single court ruling in 2014 quietly rewrote religious freedom for an entire continent.